It was a quiet autumn evening in the small, picturesque town of Willow Creek. The leaves, painted in hues of amber and crimson, blanketed the streets, crunching softly beneath the feet of late commuters and evening strollers. Maya Evans was among them, heading home after another exhausting day. At 23, she was juggling college classes, a part-time job at a local diner, and volunteer work at the town's only shelter. Life wasn't easy, but she made do, her relentless optimism and strong sense of responsibility carrying her through the daily grind. The town was unassuming, the kind of place people passed through on road trips without giving it a second thought. But for Maya, it was home, a safe haven that had cradled her after her parents' untimely death when she was 16. She lived with her grandmother, Ruth, in a modest but cozy house on the edge of town. Despite their struggles, they found joy in each other's company and the simple pleasures life afforded them. Maya had always believed in the beauty of ordinary days, but she was about to learn how quickly ordinary could transform into extraordinary. As she walked along the dimly lit road that curved around Willow Creek Central Park, the evening seemed like any other. The distant hum of a car engine grew louder behind her, a common enough occurrence on the usually quiet street. But something was different this time. The sound wasn't steady, it was erratic, punctuated by loud sputters and what sounded like metal grinding against metal. Maya turned instinctively, her eyes narrowing in concern. A sleek black car hurtled around the corner, swerving dangerously close to the curb. Its headlights flickered, casting disjointed beams of light across the road. The vehicle seemed out of control, its tires screeching as the driver fought to maintain a grip on the wheel. Maya froze for a moment, her brain struggling to process the chaos unfolding before her. Then, with a deafening crash, the car veered off the road and slammed into an old oak tree at the edge of the park. The impact was devastating. The front of the car crumpled like paper, the hood spewing steam and smoke. For a few heart-stopping seconds, there was silence, a suffocating stillness that made the crash seem almost unreal. Then the faint sound of crackling flames broke through the quiet, and Maya's paralysis shattered. Without a second thought, she sprinted toward the wreckage. The car was a mangled mess, its once sleek exterior now a jagged shell of twisted metal. Smoke poured from the engine, and flames began to lick at the edges of the hood. Maya could feel the heat even from a distance, but it was the figure slumped over the steering wheel that held her attention. The driver was unconscious, his face partially obscured by the airbag that had deployed on impact. "Help!" Maya shouted, her voice ringing out into the empty night. But no one was around, the street was eerily deserted. Panic bubbled in her chest, but she forced it down. There was no time to wait for someone else to intervene. If she didn't act now, the driver might not survive. Maya circled to the driver's side of the car, tugging at the door handle. It didn't budge. She yanked harder, putting all her weight into it, but the door was jammed. The heat from the fire was intensifying, and the smoke was becoming thicker, stinging her eyes and filling her lungs. Desperation surged through her veins as she ran to the passenger side, hoping for a miracle. The door there was slightly ajar. She seized the opportunity, pulling it open and crawling inside. The driver was a man, probably in his late 40s, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit now stained with blood and soot. His face was pale, a gash on his forehead trickling crimson down his temple. Maya shook him gently, her voice trembling as she tried to rouse him. "Sir? Can you hear me? You have to wake up." There was no response. She checked for a pulse, relief flooding her when she found it, weak but steady. The flames were creeping closer, the acrid smell of burning plastic making her cough violently. She had to move quickly. Using all her strength, she reached across him to unbuckle his seatbelt. The clasp was stuck, and her hands, slick with sweat and shaking from adrenaline, struggled to release it. Finally, with a sharp click, the belt came free. Gripping the man under his arms, Maya began to pull him out of the car. He was heavier than she anticipated, his unconscious body a dead weight that seemed impossible to move. The flames were now inside the vehicle, crawling up the seats and licking at her sneakers. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to save herself, but she ignored it, focusing solely on getting the man to safety. With a final, desperate heave, she managed to drag him out of the car and onto the grass a safe distance away. She collapsed beside him, gasping for air and trembling from head to toe. Her lungs burned from the smoke, and her muscles ached from the effort, but she didn't care. The man was alive, and that was all that mattered. As she caught her breath, she noticed something odd. Even in the chaos, there was an air of familiarity about him. His sharp features, now marred by soot and blood, tickled the edges of her memory. It wasn't until the distant wail of sirens pierced the night that it hit her. She'd seen his face before, not in person, but on television and magazine covers. This was John Carter, the reclusive tech billionaire whose innovations had revolutionized entire industries. The realization sent a jolt through her, but there was no time to dwell on it. The fire department and paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficient movements a stark contrast to the chaos Maya had just endured. She watched as they loaded John onto a stretcher, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief and exhaustion. One of the paramedics approached her, a look of concern etched across his face. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" She shook her head, her voice hoarse as she managed to whisper, "I'm fine." The paramedic didn't seem convinced, but before he could press further, another figure appeared, a police officer who had been directing the fire crew. He looked at Maya with a mixture of admiration and incredulity. "You're the one who pulled him out of the car?" She nodded silently, suddenly feeling self-conscious under his gaze. "That was incredibly brave," the officer said. "You may have just saved his life." As the night wore on, Maya gave her statement to the police and watched as John was whisked away to the hospital. She declined the paramedic's offer to take her in for a checkup, insisting she just wanted to go home. The weight of what had happened didn't fully hit her until she was back in her room, sitting on the edge of her bed with her soot-streaked hands trembling in her lap. She had always believed in doing the right thing, in helping others whenever she could. But this was beyond anything she'd ever imagined. She couldn't shake the image of John Carter's face, the surreal knowledge that she had just saved one of the most influential men in the world. And though she didn't know it yet, her life, and the lives of everyone in Willow Creek, was about to change forever. The morning light broke through the thin curtains of Maya's bedroom, but the peaceful rays did little to soothe her frazzled nerves. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, flashes of the previous night returned in vivid detail, the screech of tires, the suffocating smoke, and the way her heart had raced as she pulled a complete stranger from the fiery wreckage. But it wasn't just the memory of the rescue that kept her awake. It was the man she'd saved, John Carter. For someone like Maya, John Carter was more myth than man. She had grown up hearing about his groundbreaking innovations in technology, from his contributions to renewable energy to his ambitious plans for space exploration. He was the kind of figure people read about in headlines, not someone you expected to encounter on a quiet street in Willow Creek, much less rescue from a life-threatening situation. The thought filled her with a strange mix of disbelief and unease. What would happen now? Would he even remember her? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her bedroom door. It was her grandmother, Ruth, her warm smile tinged with concern. "Maya, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice carrying a note of curiosity. "He says he's from Mr. Carter's team." Maya's stomach flipped. She followed Ruth to the small living room, where a sharply dressed man in a navy suit stood by the window, his demeanor professional but approachable. He turned as she entered, extending a hand. "Miss Evans, my name is Daniel West," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "I'm Mr. Carter's personal assistant. First, let me thank you on behalf of our entire team for what you did last night. Your bravery saved his life." Maya shook his hand, feeling a little out of her depth. I did what anyone would have done, she murmured, her cheeks flushing. Daniel's expression softened, but there was a spark of intensity in his eyes. With all due respect, not everyone would have risked their own life to pull a stranger from a burning car. Mr. Carter wanted me to personally convey his gratitude. He's currently recovering at the hospital, but he's asked to meet you as soon as he's able. The words caught her off guard. She had assumed, perhaps naively, that her role in the ordeal ended with the rescue. The idea of meeting John Carter face to face, outside the chaos of the accident, made her stomach churn. What could she possibly say to someone like him? And why did he want to meet her at all? I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to say anything, Daniel replied with a small smile. Mr. Carter just wants to thank you personally. He's also asked me to ensure that you're taken care of in the meantime. If there's anything you need, medical expenses, time off work, whatever it may be, please don't hesitate to let me know. Maya's immediate reaction was to refuse. She wasn't comfortable with the idea of being indebted to anyone, let alone a billionaire. But before she could voice her protest, Daniel handed her a business card. Just think it over, he said. And if you're willing, we'd love for you to visit Mr. Carter tomorrow. After Daniel left, Maya sank into the worn fabric of the couch, her mind racing. Ruth sat beside her, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. You did a good thing, Maya, she said softly. And now, it seems like that good thing is coming back to you. But Maya wasn't so sure. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to be upended in ways she couldn't predict. Still, her curiosity outweighed her apprehension. The next morning, after a restless night of tossing and turning, she found herself standing outside the private hospital where John Carter was recovering. The hospital staff ushered her into a spacious, sunlit room on the top floor. John Carter was sitting up in bed, his complexion still pale but his eyes sharp and alert. He looked less like the larger-than-life figure from the news and more like a man who had recently faced his mortality. He smiled as she entered, the gesture warm and genuine. Maya Evans, he said, his voice carrying a mix of gratitude and disbelief. The woman who saved my life. Maya felt a rush of nerves. I was just in the right place at the right time, she said quickly. Anyone would have done the same. John chuckled, though it was tinged with weariness. Somehow, I doubt that. What you did was extraordinary. I owe you more than I can ever repay. Before she could respond, he gestured for her to sit. Over the next hour, the two talked, their conversation oscillating between the events of the crash and their respective lives. Maya found herself opening up about her struggles, her parents' death, her responsibilities, her dreams of becoming a social worker. John listened intently, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. I've spent my life surrounded by people who are motivated by power or money, he said finally. But you acted out of pure selflessness. That's rare, Maya. And it's something I deeply respect. His words left her speechless. She wasn't used to such earnest praise, especially from someone like him. But what surprised her even more was what he said next. I want to help you, he said firmly. Not as repayment, but because I believe in investing in people who make the world better. Tell me, Maya, what would you do if you had the resources to achieve your dreams? The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Maya hesitated, her mind racing. She had spent so long focusing on surviving that she hadn't allowed herself to think about what thriving might look like. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but resolute. I'd create a foundation, she said. Something that provides resources and opportunities for people in need. A place where no one feels alone. John nodded, his expression thoughtful. Then that's what we'll do, he said simply. Maya stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up. "Wait, you're serious?" "Dead serious," he replied. "You saved my life, Maya. Now I want to help you change others' lives." The conversation shifted after that, but Maya's thoughts remained anchored to his promise. As she left the hospital, a sense of unreality washed over her. Could this really be happening? Could her split-second decision to help a stranger truly alter the course of her life? That evening, she returned home to find her small street buzzing with activity. News crews had descended on Willow Creek, their cameras trained on her modest house. Word of her heroic act had spread, and the town was abuzz with excitement. Neighbors she barely knew stopped by to offer congratulations, their faces alight with pride. But not everyone was so kind. As Maya navigated the sudden media frenzy, whispers began to circulate, jealous murmurs about her newfound attention and speculation about her motives. It stung more than she cared to admit, but she tried to focus on the good. Over the next few days, Maya met with John Carter's team to discuss the foundation they would create together. Each meeting brought a mix of excitement and doubt. Could she really handle something this big? Was she deserving of such an opportunity? But every time she questioned herself, she remembered the moment she pulled John from the car, the fire, the smoke, the feeling that she had been put there for a reason. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was her chance to turn a single act of courage into something that could change the world. As days passed, Maya's life continued to spiral into a whirlwind of unexpected events. At first, it felt like a dream, a surreal moment of good fortune and opportunity that couldn't possibly be real. But the more time she spent working with John Carter and his team, the more it became clear that this wasn't just a fleeting moment of kindness, it was the beginning of something much larger. The foundation, which they decided to call the Willow Creek Initiative, took shape quickly. John's wealth and influence, combined with Maya's passion and first-hand experience of the challenges people faced in underserved communities, made them a powerful team. They began with small-scale programs, educational workshops, mentorship for at-risk youth, and a food bank for those who had fallen on hard times. But as the weeks turned into months, Maya's role within the foundation grew, expanding from the initial volunteer position to something far more pivotal. Every time Maya sat down with John, or his high-powered team of advisors, she couldn't help but be in awe of the scope of the project. She had always dreamed of making a difference, but now she was doing it, taking what had once been a quiet ambition and turning it into an undeniable force for change. And it wasn't just the foundation itself that was changing her life, it was the ripple effect that it had on Willow Creek and beyond. The town that had once seemed so quiet, so unremarkable, now had its name in headlines. The small, struggling community began to shine as the epicenter of a new movement, one that was driven by social good, compassion, and the understanding that even a single person's actions could spark a massive shift in the world. Maya, though still grounded in her humble roots, was no longer just an ordinary girl from Willow Creek. She was a symbol of hope, a living example of what happens when you take a risk to help others, and her name was beginning to be recognized across the country. But with the growing attention came the pressures and challenges Maya had never anticipated. It was one thing to help create a foundation that would serve the people she cared about, but it was another entirely to manage the expectations of thousands of people, donors, volunteers, and media outlets all eager to see the foundation succeed. The weight of responsibility began to bear down on her, and with each passing day, the lines between her old life and her new one blurred. The life she had known in Willow Creek, the quiet, predictable existence with Ruth, the small comforts of familiarity, was becoming increasingly distant. There were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, consumed by doubt. Was she really cut out for this? Could she handle the financial complexities of running such an expansive project? What if she let people down? The voice of self-doubt echoed louder than ever, especially when she found herself in meetings with powerful people, business leaders and philanthropists who treated her as though she were one of them, though she felt like an imposter. Despite her fear, she carried on. She had no choice. She had started something meaningful, and she couldn't back down now. Besides, it wasn't just her future on the line, it was the future of everyone who relied on the foundation, everyone who had trusted her to make things better. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. However, even in the midst of all her newfound responsibilities, Maya couldn't help but notice the subtle, increasingly complicated dynamic between her and John. At first, their professional relationship had been straightforward. He was the billionaire tech mogul, and she was the passionate social worker. But as the months wore on, their interactions became more personal, less formal. John was always kind, always attentive, but there were moments when his gaze lingered a little too long, when the conversations veered into topics that felt a little too intimate. It wasn't that she hadn't noticed the attraction. She was human, after all. John was charismatic, charming, and undeniably handsome. And even more than that, his generosity and vision were things Maya admired deeply. He had dedicated so much of his life to advancing technology for the betterment of humanity, and now, with the foundation, he was proving that he cared just as much about the people who had been left behind by society. But Maya couldn't allow herself to think about anything beyond the work they were doing together. She was already stretched thin, trying to balance her newfound responsibilities with her old life in Willow Creek. Ruth needed her, the shelter needed her, and the people relying on the foundation needed her focus. Maya had no room for personal distractions, especially not with someone like John. She reminded herself constantly that her role was to guide the foundation, not to indulge in feelings that might complicate matters. One evening, as they were finishing up a late meeting in a sleek conference room at the foundation's headquarters, John walked Maya to the elevator. The building was quiet, the lights dimmed as the staff had already gone home for the night. "Maya," John said, his voice low but intense. "I want to thank you again for everything you've done. Not just for the foundation, but for me. You've changed my life more than you know." She smiled, though it felt tight. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." He gave a small laugh, but there was an edge to it. "I think you're being modest. But I get it. You're not one for the spotlight. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve it." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Maya stepped inside, unsure of what to say. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. She wanted to step back, to reassert the boundaries between them, but something in her chest, a strange, unfamiliar flutter, kept her from doing so. Before she could respond, John spoke again, his voice softer now. "Maya, if you ever need anything, anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm not just talking about the foundation. I'm talking about you, as a person. I've seen the way you work, and I've seen what drives you. I respect that more than you know." The elevator doors closed, and Maya pressed the button for the ground floor, her heart racing. She didn't know what to make of his words, or of the emotions they stirred in her. She had always prided herself on being strong and self-sufficient, but now, with everything changing so quickly, she felt a vulnerability she hadn't known existed. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, press conferences, and new partnerships. The foundation was growing rapidly, and with it, Maya's reputation as a leader in social change. She began to meet with more influential figures, those who had the power to take her ideas to the next level, but none of them seemed to see her the way John did. They didn't see her as someone who had truly been through hardship, someone who had once struggled to make ends meet, and then gone on to build something real for others. They saw her as a face of the Willow Creek Initiative, a person who had been catapulted into this role by sheer chance, and, more often than not, their interest in her felt transactional. But John seemed to see her for who she was, not just the project she had built. And that was what made her heart ache. One night, after another round of back-to-back meetings, John invited Maya to dinner. It wasn't unusual, they often worked together late into the evening. But this time felt different. There was an undercurrent of something unspoken between them, something that neither of them dared to address out loud. Over a candlelit meal at one of the city's most upscale restaurants, John leaned across the table, his voice softer than usual. "Maya," he began, his tone laced with something she couldn't quite place, "I know this has been a lot for you. I know you've got a lot on your plate, but I want you to know, whatever happens, I'm here. For the Foundation, yes, but for you as well." Maya swallowed, her throat dry. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and for a brief, terrifying moment, she wondered if she had been blind to something that had been right in front of her all along. The night hung heavy with unspoken words between them, the soft clinking of silverware on fine china the only sound in the quiet restaurant. Maya tried to steady her breath, but something in John's gaze made her heart beat a little faster. His words had landed on her like a weight she wasn't prepared for. "I'm here for you," he had said. But how could she trust that? How could she trust someone who lived in a world so far removed from hers, someone whose life was dictated by billion-dollar deals, international headlines, and an endless string of opportunities? She had always prided herself on being independent, never relying on others, always keeping her heart guarded. But sitting across from John, with the warmth of the candlelight flickering in his eyes, Maya felt the walls she had so carefully built around herself begin to crack. She couldn't explain it, and she didn't know if she wanted to. What she did know was that she was at a crossroads, a moment where her future was about to be shaped by decisions she hadn't yet made. But there was something else gnawing at her. Despite the undeniable connection she felt with John, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being swept into a world that didn't belong to her. His world. It was like standing on the edge of a vast ocean, feeling the pull of the tide but knowing that if she gave in, it would drag her to depths she couldn't fathom. She had always been a person of the earth, grounded in the everyday struggles of people who lived paycheck to paycheck, fought for resources, and struggled against the weight of societal systems that kept them in place. John, on the other hand, was a person of the stars, his mind reached heights that most couldn't even dream of. "I don't know what to say, John," Maya finally said, her voice breaking the silence between them. "You're offering me something I've never had before, resources, opportunities, a way to make a real difference. But..." John's eyes softened. He didn't speak immediately, letting her words hang in the air. Instead, he reached across the table, his hand hovering just above hers before gently resting on top. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions now. All I'm asking is for you to trust me. And trust yourself." Maya looked down at their hands. His was warm and strong, but hers felt small and fragile in comparison. She didn't trust herself, not entirely. She had spent so long second-guessing her every move, worrying about the consequences of her decisions, that it felt impossible to take a leap of faith in anyone, even someone like John. But she couldn't deny the sincerity in his eyes. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, the undeniable magnetism that drew her in, despite all her reservations. This wasn't just about a billionaire offering a helping hand. There was something deeper here, something unspoken, that made her want to believe in the impossible. For the first time in a long while, Maya wondered if she could let go of her fears and simply trust him, trust her instincts, and trust that this journey was taking her somewhere she needed to be. "I don't know what the future holds," Maya said quietly, her fingers brushing lightly against his, "but I know I'm not the same person I was before. What we're doing here, it's bigger than any of us. It's bigger than me." John nodded, his thumb gently brushing the back of her hand. "I know. But it's also about you. Your vision, your heart. That's what's going to make this work. I believe in you, Maya. And I'm not going anywhere." Her heart fluttered in her chest, a complicated mix of gratitude, fear, and longing. How could she explain to him the weight of the responsibility she carried? How could she make him understand that, no matter how much she wanted to believe in this, believe in him, she couldn't afford to lose sight of who she was? The dinner continued, but the words between them were fewer, each moment laden with the understanding that something was shifting, changing. When they finally left the restaurant, John insisted on driving her home, a gesture that felt so personal, yet so distant from the life she had known. Maya glanced out of the window as they drove through the city, her thoughts racing. Her life had never been this complicated before, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for the consequences of what was unfolding. As they reached her street, Maya noticed something that caught her off guard: the familiar, comforting sight of her neighborhood, the small houses, the streets lined with old trees, the sounds of children playing. This was where she had always belonged. But in the back of her mind, she wondered if it was also where she was meant to stay. John stopped the car in front of her house and turned off the engine. There was a long silence between them, filled only with the hum of the engine cooling down. "I don't want to make this harder on you," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "I know you have a lot to think about." Maya looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign that this wasn't just a fleeting moment, that this connection wasn't just a result of circumstances. "John, I can't just step into your world and pretend everything is simple," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't belong there." He smiled slightly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a way that felt both understanding and sad. "You don't have to pretend, Maya. You're not stepping into my world, you're creating your own. And I'm just here to support you, whatever that looks like." Maya took a deep breath. She wasn't sure what to make of his words, but she knew he wasn't just talking about the foundation. He was talking about her. He was talking about the person she was becoming, the person he saw in her. "I'll think about it," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need time." "Take all the time you need," John replied, his tone gentle. "I'll be here, whenever you're ready." Maya stepped out of the car, feeling both a sense of relief and an undeniable weight in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to fully embrace it. But one thing was certain: nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The foundation, her connection with John, the community she was helping, it was all part of a larger story that was unfolding, a story she hadn't fully grasped yet. As she walked up to her front door, Ruth was sitting on the porch, a warm cup of tea in her hands. She didn't say anything at first but simply watched Maya approach, as though she knew her granddaughter needed a moment of peace. Maya sat down beside her, letting the silence stretch between them. "What's on your mind, honey?" Ruth finally asked, her voice full of quiet wisdom. Maya exhaled slowly, staring at the stars above. "Everything's changing, Grandma. And I don't know if I'm ready for it." Ruth smiled softly. "Change is hard. But it's also the only way we grow. Just remember, Maya, it's not about where you go, it's about who you become along the way." Maya nodded, leaning back against the porch. The weight of Ruth's words settled over her like a comforting blanket. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future held or whether she was ready for everything that was coming her way. But maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe that she could handle whatever came next. As she gazed at the night sky, a small flicker of hope sparked within her. Whatever happened, she wasn't alone. And that, more than anything, was what made the unknown feel a little less frightening. Maya awoke the next morning with a sense of heaviness that clung to her like a second skin. The early sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft, golden glow across her bedroom. For a moment, she lay still, trying to shake the lingering feeling of uncertainty that had taken root in her heart. The events of the previous night, John's words, his presence, the promise of something bigger, felt like a whirlwind that had swept her into a life she wasn't sure she was ready for. But one thing was undeniable: she couldn't go back. The foundation, her place in it, and the community she had started to build, had become too important for her to simply walk away. She dressed quickly, the routine grounding her in something familiar, even as the weight of her decision lingered. Maya had always been a woman of action, a problem solver, and the uncertainty she felt now was a foreign feeling. But perhaps it was time to face it head-on. She had never been one to shy away from challenges, and this, she realized, was the greatest challenge she had ever faced, the choice between the life she had always known and the one that was being offered to her, a life with all its unknowns and potential. When she arrived at the Foundation's office later that morning, the buzz of activity was palpable. The team was preparing for a press conference that would showcase their latest partnership with a major tech company, an opportunity that would put the Willow Creek initiative on the map in a way they hadn't imagined just months ago. Maya's role in this was more critical than ever, but as she walked through the glass doors of the sleek, modern building, she couldn't help but feel a sense of detachment, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold rather than living it herself. John was already there, standing by the large conference table, talking with a group of investors. His sharp suit and confident demeanor made him appear even more powerful than Maya remembered. When he saw her, he excused himself from the group and walked over, offering her a warm, familiar smile. "Good morning, Maya," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "How are you feeling today?" Maya took a deep breath, not sure how to respond. She had spent the night thinking, turning over her options, trying to make sense of her emotions. But now, faced with him, all the answers seemed just out of reach. She smiled, but it was strained. "I'm doing okay. Just, trying to figure everything out." John nodded, his expression softening. "I know it's a lot. You're doing an incredible job here, Maya. We're making real change, and that's because of you." Maya felt a twinge of discomfort at his praise. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate it, she did, but it felt like the kind of praise that came with strings attached, strings she wasn't sure she wanted to follow. "It's a team effort," she said, her voice steady. "But thank you." Before John could respond, the door to the conference room opened, and one of the media relations managers walked in. "Maya, John, we're ready for the press conference. Everyone's gathered, and the cameras are rolling." Maya's stomach fluttered as she followed John into the room, her thoughts racing. The conference room was bright, filled with reporters, cameras, and bright lights that seemed to make everything feel more intense. As the representatives of the tech company introduced themselves, Maya took a seat beside John, feeling a little out of place in the sea of polished executives and media professionals. The weight of her responsibility felt heavier than ever. She had never imagined she would be in a room like this, and now, sitting beside John, someone who had a hand in shaping so many of the world's most groundbreaking technologies, she wondered if she even belonged here at all. The press conference started, and Maya tried to focus, answering questions with the calm professionalism she had worked hard to develop. The questions came fast and furious, about the future of the initiative, its impact on the community, and what they hoped to accomplish with their new partnership. Maya responded with clarity, but beneath her calm exterior, her mind was still miles away, caught up in the struggle between her past and her present. As the conference continued, Maya caught a glimpse of the cameras flashing and the reporters scribbling notes, their attention fixed solely on the partnership between the Foundation and the tech company. She knew this was a huge moment, one that could change everything for Willow Creek, but part of her couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else, something more important, that was being overshadowed by the flashing lights and the endless questions about business deals and sponsorships. When the conference finally came to an end, Maya excused herself to step outside for a moment of quiet. The cool air hit her face as she walked out into the courtyard, trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. She had worked so hard for this, sacrificed so much, pushed herself beyond what she thought was possible. But now, as she stood there, watching the world go on around her, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of doubt. Was this truly what she wanted? Or had she gotten swept up in something too big for her to handle? "Maya?" The voice interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to find John standing in the doorway, his expression concerned. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping out into the courtyard to join her. Maya hesitated, unsure of how to express the whirlwind of emotions inside her. I'm not sure, she said honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything feels overwhelming. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. John didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. You don't have to be ready for everything, Maya. You just have to take it one step at a time. And I'll be here with you, every step of the way. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, but Maya couldn't ignore the part of her that screamed to step back. She had always been independent, always relied on herself to make things happen. And now, as she stood on the edge of something bigger than she could comprehend, the fear of losing herself in it all started to take hold. I don't want to lose who I am, Maya confessed, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want to get lost in all of this world you live in, with all the money and the power. I've always been about the people, about the community. I don't want to forget that. John looked at her with a mixture of understanding and something else, something deeper, like a quiet promise. You won't lose who you are, Maya. That's the beauty of what we're doing here. We're changing the world, yes, but we're doing it on our terms. Your terms. You're the heart of this foundation. You're the reason it's working, because you care. Don't ever forget that. For a moment, Maya stood there, caught between the life she had known and the life that was unfolding before her. The path ahead was uncertain, and the choices she made in the next few days would determine the course of her future. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fully embrace everything John was offering, but as she looked into his eyes, she saw something that gave her hope, a belief that, no matter what, she wouldn't have to face it alone. I don't know where this journey is going, Maya said, her voice steadier now. But I'm willing to take the next step. With you. John smiled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Maya felt a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever doubts she had, she knew she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to give her the courage to face whatever came next. As they walked back inside, Maya knew that the foundation, the town of Willow Creek, and even her own future had been irrevocably changed. And as daunting as it felt, she was finally ready to take her place in this new chapter, to embrace the unknown, and to trust that, in time, she would find her way. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, interviews, and decisions that seemed to unfold with a life of their own. Willow Creek's future hung in the balance, and Maya was at the center of it all. The tech partnership was moving forward rapidly, and every step she took felt like it was leading her deeper into a world she had never fully understood, a world where money and influence were currencies, and power shifted with a single word. But despite the dizzying pace of it all, there was something else that grounded her, the people of Willow Creek, the faces she knew so well, the community that had been her anchor all these years. At night, after the meetings had ended and the world seemed to quiet down, Maya found herself reflecting on the choices she had made. John's presence had been a steady comfort, his support unwavering, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing something essential in herself. Each time she had to make a decision, every time she moved further into John's world, she wondered if she was betraying the very people who had trusted her, her friends, her family, the town that had shaped her. It wasn't just about the foundation anymore. It was about finding a way to keep herself intact, to stay true to the core of who she was, even as everything around her shifted. One evening, as the glow of sunset bathed the town in a warm amber light, Maya sat alone in her small kitchen, a cup of tea in hand, staring out the window. The house was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Her grandmother, Ruth, had gone to bed early, as she often did, and Maya was left to wrestle with her thoughts. She needed clarity, a moment of peace where she could hear her own voice without the noise of the world intruding. The sound of a knock at the door startled her, and she stood up quickly, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she found John standing on the other side, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. There was something about the way he stood there, looking as if he were unsure of whether to enter, that made Maya pause. She had spent so many hours with him in the past few weeks, yet something about this moment felt different, like they were on the precipice of something neither of them could control. "Maya," John said, his voice softer than usual. "I know this isn't the best time, but I needed to talk to you." Maya stepped aside to let him in, her mind racing. She had been trying to process everything on her own, to make sense of the chaos that was her life now. But there was no denying the connection she felt with John, even though it frightened her. He was a force of nature, unstoppable, confident, and relentless in his pursuit of making things happen. And though Maya admired his drive, she wasn't sure if she was ready to follow him into the whirlwind. They sat in the living room, the soft light of the lamps casting long shadows across the room. John's gaze was fixed on her, as if he were waiting for her to say something, anything that would break the silence. But Maya didn't know where to begin. She had so many questions, about the foundation, about the partnership, about the future they were building together, but the biggest question of all lingered in her mind, unspoken: could she truly belong to both worlds? Could she reconcile the person she had been with the person she was becoming? "I know you've been thinking a lot about everything," John said, breaking the silence. "I can see it in your eyes. And I want you to know, Maya, that whatever choice you make, I'll respect it. I'm not asking you to give up who you are or where you come from. I want to be there with you, to help you build something bigger than either of us could do alone." Maya's heart ached at his words, but she couldn't let herself be swept away by his promises. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can take on this world, this responsibility. I've worked so hard to make a difference, but it's never been about the money, or the power, or the headlines. It's about the people. It's always been about the people." John's eyes softened, and he leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "I get that, Maya. And I know it's not easy. But I'm asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust that we can make this work, that we can do this together without losing sight of the things that matter. This," he gestured to the space between them, to the life they were building, "this isn't about me. It's about us, and the change we can create. It's about giving the people what they deserve: opportunity, hope, a chance to live the life they've always dreamed of. We can do that, Maya. We can make it happen." Maya closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise in her mind. She had always been a person who fought for what was right, who stood up for the underdog, and who believed that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the world. But this was different. This was big, bigger than she had ever imagined, and it scared her. "What if we fail?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "What if all of this, everything we've worked for, falls apart? What if we lose sight of what really matters in the process?" John reached across the table, his hand gently covering hers. "Maya, every great endeavor comes with risks. But we're not doing this alone. We have each other, and we have the community. We have everything we need to succeed." The warmth of his touch sent a ripple of comfort through her, but it didn't erase the doubts that gnawed at her insides. She wasn't afraid of failure. She had faced failure before. What scared her more than anything was the idea of losing herself along the way, of becoming someone she didn't recognize, someone consumed by the very thing she had spent her life trying to avoid. "I can't just abandon everything I've worked for," Maya said, her voice more certain now, though the fear still lingered. "The people of Willow Creek, they need me. They've always needed me." John nodded, his expression serious. "And you won't abandon them. But you don't have to do this alone, Maya. I'm not asking you to sacrifice who you are. I'm asking you to let me help you. Let us help you. Together, we can make Willow Creek a beacon of hope for the entire country. We can show the world what it means to truly invest in a community." Maya sat back in her chair, her mind racing as she considered his words. She knew this was the crossroads, the moment when everything would change. If she walked away, she would be giving up the opportunity to make a lasting impact, to change the trajectory of not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. But if she embraced this new world, if she took John's hand and moved forward, she risked losing everything that had made her who she was. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Maya took a deep breath, her resolve slowly solidifying. "I'm not ready to make this decision yet," she said quietly, meeting John's gaze. "But I'm willing to take the next step. I'm willing to see where this goes. But I need to promise myself, and I need you to promise me, that I won't lose sight of who I am along the way." John's eyes shone with something between relief and pride, and he squeezed her hand. "I promise you, Maya. You won't lose yourself. You're the reason any of this matters. And I'll be here, every step of the way." As Maya looked into his eyes, a sense of calm washed over her, a quiet understanding settling deep in her bones. She wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to make all the difference.